All right. Hey, it is great to be able to have Dr. David Balik and Chuck Gilliam. Is it Gilliam?
Gilliam.
Gilliam. Okay. I always
William
say
with a G.
William with a G. Okay.
And
Gilliam.
soon to be Dr. Gilliam.
Soon to be. The Ed S is
coming.
there. So we're
coming.
working. What are we doing? Dissertation right now?
Dissertation.
Okay.
Fun
good.
times.
Okay. Well, these guys are two great friends. They're two of the guys who are really moving and shaking with ACSI, the Association of Christian Schools International, an organization that I believe in with my whole heart. All three of the schools that I've been in have been members with ACSI, and just making an enormous impact, not just in the U.S., but really in the world at large. And so it's a pleasure to have you guys on the show. Finally, other people will hear another Canadian accent. I get mocked for my Canadian accent. I was pondering just singing the Canadian anthem when we started the show, but
That'd be a first, I'm guessing.
that would be a first. That's right. That's right. So, hey, it's great to have you guys on the show. I'd love to just kind of learn a little bit about your own stories first. You've got vice president behind your name, David, so you're going to go first. And so, tell us a little bit about kind of how God prepared you for this role, and maybe before you even get there, tell me a little bit about what your role is right now at ACSI.
Well, I appreciate that. It's changing. So have served as VP USA over the last few years, and now Canada is being added to the mix. So how crazy is that, awesome. Right? And I tell folks, I wouldn't make a big deal out of being Canadian, in the past, but this is just so clearly a God thing. How does God have a Canadian become vice president USA, and then quite literally expands his territory to include North America? And so that's where we are right now. And it's part of the move towards becoming global. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. You would think we were already global, and we are in many ways as the Association of Christian Schools International, but lots happening to sort of expand that vision, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go. But born and raised in Canada, and then I was a police officer there for a period of time. When you talk about God preparing you for things, I knew after I'd met my wife, rededicated my life to the Lord. I've been in Christian education ever since, but as a principal up in Canada, and then God moved us to Decatur, Alabama to be a head of school. And so I've served in a few different administrative roles, most recently at Briarwood Christian School in Birmingham, Alabama, before I came on board with ACSI in 2015, and kind of went from being a Southeast Regional Director to Senior Director, Eastern Division, which is what Chuck's doing now, and then Dr. Larry Taylor kind of officially appointed me as VP USA, as I said a few years ago. So it's been a fun ride, and exciting these days to be a part of ACSI. That's for sure.
When does it become official for your VP of North America?
Well, it kind of that's a really good question. It kind of is. We're moving to either 6 or 7 divisions globally, all around the world, and it's kind of been ACSI 1.0, as I like to refer to kind of that first 40 years of existence. Did a lot of great things, and, obviously has been fulfilling our mission, as an organization for a long time. But we were very USA-centric for a lot of that time, and that kind of stood to reason because the revenue, pretty much all revenue was being generated out of the USA. So USA was kind of the big dog, and everybody else kind of got in line with what was happening in the USA. And the global emphasis was not an afterthought as much as it was, kind of, okay, now how will we translate this, to the global scene? And a lot of folks around the world didn't really appreciate that. And I think there's a little bit of arrogance maybe wrapped up in that. But we're changing. ACSI 2.0, is emerging, and part of that is, our strategic plan, which we're building on right now through 2030. Lots of exciting things happening there, and God is very much at work in ACSI and in Christian schools, as you know, growing. HCA, I know, is growing, and Chuck and I, we're just thrilled to have a role, a small part in all of that.
as you've kind of been in the ACSI world, I'm so intrigued where you're saying that people weren't responding to that global portion. That's frankly, even when I was first starting out, that was frankly one of my favorite parts about it, knowing that what we're doing is a small part of what's taking place from a global perspective. And frankly, with the new president, Larry Taylor, no relation of mine, but as Larry's jumped in that presidential role, he's been doing a phenomenal job. And I frankly have loved the idea that he has emphasized the mission field, that if we're gonna if the gospel is central to what we're doing in the Christian school movement, then it just makes sense that gospel would be spread globally through the method of Christian education.
And it has been, I mean, I don't want to diminish what happened kind of those first 40 years around the world. A lot of great things happening, a lot of great people working to spread the gospel and to fulfill our mission, as an organization around the world. It's just now we're becoming more integrated, I think, and North America will be one of 7 divisions, global divisions, not as much kind of the way it was in the past with USA being here and then kind of the rest of the world.
Right.
We're going to be one
and
aligned and united, and it's a big job.
Right.
I mean, this is probably a 5 to 10 year process at minimum to get to be truly global, as we like to refer to it. But we're working on it, and I think God has brought in, our president, Dr. Larry Taylor, people like him and others, fresh wind, as I like to refer to, fresh wind blowing through our organization. Chuck is very much a part of that. That bring just a fresh set of eyes and ideas and asking questions and things like that, and to get us where we need to be, where we believe God is leading us, and that is to become truly global as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Chuck, let's hear a little bit about you. You're kind of hometown guy in this area. So tell us a little bit about kind of what God has done. First, tell us about your position, and then tell us a little bit about what brought you there.
Yeah, so my role is Senior Director for Eastern Division. So my states that I work with are Florida to Maine. In that division, we have probably about 930 schools, about 270,000 students. So it's actually the largest division of ACSI. We're divided east, central, west. And for those who may not understand ACSI, ACSI is actually the largest Christian school association in the world. So about 5.5 million students worldwide, globally, as David was talking about earlier. So, but prior to that, I was at Eagles Landing Christian Academy in the Atlanta market. I was there 22 years.
Unbelievable.
So I started there in 99, kind of worked my way through the process, and I spent the last, around 2008, I became assistant head of school, then head of school, so about 12 years or so leading the academy. And 2020, which was a unique year for everyone with COVID, I actually accepted this role in February of 2020 , right before COVID hit.
Wow. You wanted out.
Wow.
But I did do all of 2020 and into 2021 at Elka. I did both roles.
Okay.
So my role really is taking care of member schools like Hebron. So how do I assist you as a large school leader? How do I connect you back to the resources of the association? How do I network you with other leaders? So my job is really what can we do to create flourishing at Hebron by connecting you back to who we are as an organization.
Okay.
So I just take and you know this, you're sitting in the seat, I take the practical things that I learned as a head of school, and I try to utilize those every single day through consulting and resources, all of those pieces to help you thrive. So as David mentioned, great season. I think between year on year over the last 2 years, the Eastern Division has grown by right at 50,000 students, which our Christian schools are exploding right now. So, and not only that, not only are our schools exploding, but we have so many startups right now. We're really seeing a season of churches wanting to start Christian schools and micro schools, all different types of thinking around Christian education. So praise the Lord, expanded opportunity for us right now in this sphere.
So throwing it out to kind of all of us, what do you see as the primary cause for that growth? I know obviously we can say COVID, but COVID was almost a revealer. So what are you seeing as the primary causes for that?
Yeah, I mean, COVID definitely, there were a lot of parents having to stay home with their children and who were in the public sector and were actually listening to some of what was being talked about. And I think became much more acutely aware of some of the curriculum that kind of ran counter to their beliefs, to their values. And so COVID definitely has played a factor. But I think just in terms of the culture, in sort of more broadly, we believe that more and more families are, tired of some of the movement in the culture, some of the messaging in the culture, things that are happening that, again, run counter to who they are as a family, and they're looking for a healthy alternative to that. And our Christian schools have been doing such an amazing job. And so I do attribute, I think, folks just growing tired of some of the foolishness, if you will, within the culture, and determining we need something better.
Right.
We need something better for our children, and the Christian school up the street is becoming a much more viable option for many families these days. What do you think, Chuck?
I agree. Yeah, Dr. Swanner was talking about this. Lynn Swanner, she does thought leadership for us research. And we are having a lot of fleeing parents. So we're seeing a lot of that. They're getting away from something. I don't know that they necessarily know what they're going to. And what our Christian schools are doing is a great job of trying to sell that to them.
That's
now,
right.
What does fleeing create? It creates a bit of a culture shift within the Christian schools. So you have all these new families that are coming in. So we now have to come alongside of Christian school leaders and say, how do we orient those families to Christian education? How do we not allow those, maybe they're, for instance, the school I was in was an outreach school, so you had some unbelieving families that were coming in. How do we help them understand culture, vision, mission, core values, all those things, so that our culture doesn't shift, right, as an institution? I think that's where we're at right now. So our focus right now is, what does good growth look like? Everyone's growing.
Right.
But is that a good thing necessarily? It is if we do it well.
Right. What does healthy growth
Healthy
look like?
growth is a critical
right.
piece right now. And I think that's what a lot of our leaders are trying to wrap their minds around as to how do we manage this going forward, this season of growth.
I see so much institutional analysis taking place from a lot of other leaders where they're really evaluating what is our mission, how are we living that out, what is the analysis of what we're doing well, what we're doing poorly, and I think really I'm working with a lot of guys who are pretty seasoned folks who maybe haven't been asking those questions as deeply. But when you're adding in a 20% or a 30% growth rate, how do you remain mission-centric? And I think that's really such a crucial component, is that if we're just in this, like I always say, as a Christian school, we have to do the school portion of that extremely well. Like we have to be great academic institutions where we're really providing opportunities for kids. But in the same regard, we have to do the Christian portion of that well. And so, for us, we have to be focused on, how does the gospel impact this educational process? How does the gospel impact the way that we train up kids, and really train teachers on training up kids?
That's right.
It's vital to what we're doing. Do you see, like, is this an impetus for looking forward to seeing voucher systems or giving parents a greater level of choice? And if so, where are you seeing that in the U.S. or maybe David, just where you're jumping in on North America too? Where are we seeing that in the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing more and more states that are passing vouchers, that are giving opportunities for, taxable benefits, as it were, for families that are pursuing private education. We're a part of CAPE, the Council for American Private Education, and it's been beautiful to see, I think, especially in recent years, how different denominations, partnering with Catholic schools and Jewish schools, we all, covet and want to have religious freedom, and choice in this country. And so CAPE and the advocacy and lobbying of that organization and others has been huge. But I want to go back just for a minute to, your comments about being mission-centric. And I just think that's so critical, especially when we talk about good growth, as Chuck said, and as you were touching on, so important that we don't drift, because the temptation is, and we see this happening from time to time, where because more and more families in open enrollment schools are not as interested in the biblical worldview integration or the Christian side of things. They want high-level academics. And so part of the consulting that Chuck referenced earlier, we do board training. We try to come alongside our leaders so that they will stay very much on mission, in terms of what they're doing. Our mission, going back to what Chuck was saying earlier, is to strengthen Christian schools and equip Christian educators worldwide. There's that worldwide piece, as they prepare students academically and inspire them to become devoted followers of Jesus Christ. So those two, we used to say a lot at Briarwood, they go hand in hand. They're not mutually exclusive, right? We want to do both with excellence for the glory of God. You're doing it here at HCA, James. We're so just proud of the amazing work that you're doing, and I know you've got a great team here. We want to continue to support that and to come alongside to strengthen what schools are doing missionally, and whether it be academic excellence, spiritual excellence, and just to support and encourage consistency in that, even through some of these, they're great times in terms of growth, but they can also be challenging times as well.
Right. As we're kind of thinking through that, just for the listeners who are listening in on the show, it is important for them to understand there's kind of two different models, right? That you have a covenantal model, and then what I always used to call a salt and light model. Some people call it an evangelism model. What did you guys call it, Chuck? Missional model, Yeah. And so my last two schools, they were both missional, or I'd call them salt and light. The school that I'm at is covenantal. So our from a covenantal perspective, just so that listeners can understand that at least one of our parents has to testify to being a born-again Christian. They have to testify to regular church attendance. And then that kind of allows us to say, hey, we're in a similar missional goal, in life. A lot of schools operate in that missional mindset, which I also think has real validity. I don't necessarily think that one's better than the other. I think that it depends on where you are. My last school in Savannah, we were missional, we were salt and light, and so there I would have parents come through, and they might be coming from a Muslim background or a very, very different background. I had a fairly large group of families that came in from a Hindu background. But when I would interview the families, I was super specific with them to say, hey, listen, if your kid just comes here and gets a great education and they just go off to Harvard, we've failed them. We want them to know Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. And so that becomes something where we say, hey, we want you to fully understand and acknowledge that we're going to openly evangelize your child, and we want them to know. And frankly, in each of those meetings, I had a chance to open my Bible and to say, here's what that means for you, and had a chance to walk through the gospel story and to teach the truth on that. I think if schools are being really deliberate with it, I think that can really function. But how do you maintain that anchor? Because I think all three of us could sit here as guys who love this field, who are called to this field. All three of us could sit here and do a totally different show on schools that used to be Christian that aren't anymore.
Absolutely.
The truth of the matter is, if you look past the ivy of most institutions in the U.S. on the university level, they all started as pastors, colleges, Bible colleges. Right. You look at Harvard, you look at Yale, you look at Princeton, you look at all of these universities. They all started with Christian roots, and yet they've strayed from those. So how do you guys, as leaders who are charged with the East Coast, for you, Chuck, for all of North America, I feel like you need a theme song for that. If we're charged with that, how do you encourage people to keep the center the center?
Yeah, so I think for me, when I was head at Eagles Landing, because we were missional, and I think that model has its strengths and it has some weaknesses. Right. It depends on the families that your community is producing, and can you continue to guard the mission. But I think it comes down, this is the Chuck Gilliam opinion, and what I tried to do was, I think it comes down to the people you hire and how you develop them.
Absolutely.
Where drift happens is in poor hiring. And when you start hiring people who are off mission, it can become a train wreck. And so the biggest issue we're facing right now with Christian schools is the staffing piece.
Right.
Because they're growing so much, the staffing can't keep up. So the thing that the trap that you may fall into is let's hire someone who's a little bit off mission because we have to put this person in this spot. And certainly there may be seasons where I think everyone needs to be able to articulate the gospel. They need a general understanding of Christian ed. They need to be active in the local church. There may be certain things you may say, all right, I can develop this person on.
That's right.
But I would express to parents, to leaders, the hiring process is critical. And putting those people in those classrooms that stand in front of our children who have an understanding of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, and also what it means to have a true understanding of Christian ed, biblical worldview integration. Those are the pieces that are very important. And then that internal staff development piece, which is what you would do here at Hebron. How do we train them? I may take this, young teacher or this teacher who's a little raw or rough, but I think within a couple of years, through a development process, we can have them become, I don't want to overstate the word expert, but to the point of being an expert in what does it mean to integrate biblically. And so the students will always be similar, right? People would ask me that and say, how are your students different from the local public school? I would say, well, they're actually very much the same. What's different is that I've interviewed every single one of these teachers, and they can articulate the gospel, and they can stand in front of your children and share the gospel with them and integrate biblically, meaning that they can connect the dots between content and God's word. To me, that protects mission, and you know that, right? I mean, that's what you're doing here,
right?
And I'll mention real quick, just to pick up on what Chuck said. ACSI, one of the important things we try to do, apart from the consulting role, which is really, really important, develop resources, right? So that we are able to strengthen and equip our schools the way our mission says. And so biblical integration, biblical worldview integration, our partnership with the Colson Center, for example, be just one example of resources that we're providing our schools so that you're not left on your own to try to figure it out. And there's other resources out there as well. But as an organization, we don't want to just talk about, helping our schools in certain ways. We really do want to produce timely, helpful, robust resources that are going to make your job just a little bit easier, James, in what you're trying to do. Because like a frog in a kettle. You touched on the Ivies earlier. All it takes is, one, as Chuck was saying, one bad hire or a couple, where the shift begins to occur and all of a sudden the culture has changed dramatically. And a lot of times, we see this among boards and heads of school. They're wondering, how did we get here? How did we get here? And so if we take our eye off the ball and succumb to sort of the pressure of maybe hiring someone that doesn't, maybe their testimony is, a little wishy-washy or not as strong as we would like, and it can go from there, like a frog in the kettle, as an illustration. But so we've got to be so careful. And I think that piece, part of what we do as ACSI is to try to exhort, come alongside, try to make sure that we're encouraging our schools and school leaders to not go down that road.
That's right. There was a book out, and this was a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, but it was actually called Dramatic Drift. And they traced back a lot of those, the most prominent, most prestigious institutions in our nation. They actually traced back when that dramatic drift began to take place. And it always, in every single situation, it tacked back to one specific senior leader that was hired that didn't have the same mindset, that didn't choose in each of those cases, didn't choose the gospel as vital to the mission. That they strayed from the idea that hey, now we're only an academic institution, we're going to lose that faith portion. It always tacked back to one leader who was then supported typically by a board who didn't oppose that or did, and so it always places to me such a weight on our shoulders as Christian leaders that we've all been heads of school. It has always been like mind-bogglingly terrifying to see how an institution begins to reflect what that leader is. That if that leader's in the Word, if that leader's really studying and understanding who Christ is in their life, typically the institution reflects that. And if they don't, it reflects that as well, and you get that idea of the dramatic drift, I think, which is so crucial to it. I love how you guys are really filling our toolbox now with really some cutting edge resources. I love the changes that are taking place with the teacher accreditations help that ACSI provides. To me, that's a vital piece of what you guys are providing as a very large, very global organization and institution. It's so interesting to have schools all over the world, and yet the same message is being proclaimed. Like,
amen.
How can that happen apart from the gospel?
That's right.
It's kind of staggering for me. All right, let me come back to the idea, just because I'm so intrigued with kind of what's taking place in Christian education across our country and maybe even the world. Where do you see the brightest lights taking place in some of the states for the pursuit of Christian education? Is there specific weighty legislation that's taking place in certain states? Are you seeing victories being fought, victories won in different states on this idea? I know we've got a conference coming up in D.C. in September on some of the legislative wins. Walk us through kind of where we're seeing some of those victories taking place.
So when I think about benefits of ACSI, one of the probably number one benefits we hear is our legal. The portion of ACSI where we are on the front lines defending Christian ed. So we at ACSI invest heavily in legal, legislative, and advocacy. So we literally have a public policy department and a lobbyist, George Trifiatis, who does a fantastic job. He's in the halls of the Capitol in D.C. working on behalf of Christian education. So I summarize that as sort of a passive benefit. You don't feel it every day, but it's happening.
Right.
And when those membership dollars are paid, they're paid to help resource that office and advocate on behalf of schools. So in Georgia, we have always experienced relative peace when it comes to anyone going after us. I think that's going to continue to change. Obviously, I think there's been some political shift in the state of Georgia, so we'll see what happens with that. But one of the things that comes to mind right away is, especially in the Northeast, some of our New England schools in particular, they're up against it. We have a Christian school in the state of Vermont who they're going through this right now, where they chose to step away from a competition because of the transgender issue. Their girls were going to be playing against a transgender male in a competition. And as a result of that, they were excluded from all competitions in the state. Basically, the association said, if that's what you're going to do, then you cannot participate. That's where we step in. That's where we come to help and defend. And so we partner with groups like ADF, Alliance for Defending Freedom. And currently right now, we are defending them, working with ADF. We are defending them in court. Now, it's not been settled. We're going to fight for them. We're going to hope and pray that we win in that and can support them. But those are the types of things that are happening. And again, in Georgia, we may be thinking, well, that's really not who we are. But it's coming to a school near you, right?
Yes.
And so we encourage schools, when they see those types of things, reach out to us so that we can come to the defense. And there are probably 2 or 3 examples across the USA where we're dealing with similar issues, where we're stepping in and saying, you cannot treat Christian schools different than you do other schools. And partnerships like ADF have been monumental in helping us.
We had attorney Dave Cortman from ADF on the show the first season, and one of the superheroes in the faith, his wife is actually my assistant, and so it's something that I hear about a lot, where he's arguing in front of the Supreme Court, really on the front lines of what these issues look like. I think, we're talking about Canada a little bit. British Columbia is going through a huge transition. You look in British Columbia, there's a very large Christian school movement, and they're really wrestling with that idea because they've been partially funded by the government.
That's right.
For like over a decade at this point in time. And so but now they're looking at saying, if you take the money, you also have to teach your children these truths. And that's a challenge.
Yeah. And I would offer just a shameless plug to families that might be listening. It's important that they advocate too for Christian
Absolutely.
Ed. And them calling, even state reps. For instance, Georgia, in my opinion, is lagging behind on the school choice process. We have our program here with SSOs and tax scholarship, but states like North Carolina, which is surprising, Carolina, Florida, these states are
Michigan,
on the forefront. Michigan,
Arizona.
Yeah.
And there is legislation right now in the Georgia Assembly that came up last session, will come up again, to expand school choice options. And really it comes down to, it's not ACSI making those calls, but families making those calls and saying, we need to fund these things.
Right.
We need to be able to use these dollars for our children to go to private education.
A lot of times people misinterpret like what this message that we're talking about is somehow we're against something.
Right.
And the message there for me is very much about parental choice. Yeah. In that, you know, in Gwinnett County, I think the funding structure here is $10,988, I think is what the taxation rate is. So every student that's being funded in the public school system, they're being funded at a rate similar to that in each state. And the truth of the matter is that my children never went to public schools. You know, they were in the schools where I've been working at for their whole lives. And the argument then becomes, shouldn't a parent have the choice to be able to take that taxation dollar and move that into the area that they choose? Now, I believe that very strongly working in Christian education. What's a byproduct from that? Well, it means that there's going to be Muslim schools and there's going to be Sikh schools and there's going to be there's going to be all of those things. But my whole point is that first of all, if we believe in true equality, then equality should be for all. That I should be able to have a Christian perspective on things and I shouldn't be bashed for it. In the same regard, if you want to have a different perspective, I'm all for you having that different perspective. And frankly, I think that we should be able to, as citizens, be able to make the choice of, I want my taxation dollars to go here to educate my children. And I think it's coming. We're seeing some of those glimmers of hope in some of the states, which I think are coming, and they're coming over issues, which is what kind of you're pointing out with this idea of there are legal battles taking place, and there's legislation being passed because of those legal battles being fought. You know, are there particular, like we've mentioned this one issue? Are there other particular battles, like we've mentioned North Carolina? Are you seeing the legislation that ACSI is also lobbying for and fighting for? Are you seeing headway being made? Are there particular points that we can be thinking about and praying about as far as victories that are happening?
Yeah, I would say in North Carolina, they've just expanded their school choice program. So you go from, I think it's $6,500 now to $7,500 per child that follows that child wherever they go. So it's an incredible program. Awesome. And what we call on school leaders to do and what we'll do through the legal legislative department is we'll mobilize voices. So like in Pennsylvania is a good example of this. Pennsylvania has a very strong Christian school network that mobilizes their voice. So anytime an issue comes up, they're going to be at the forefront of going down to the Capitol or talking to their congressman. And we're trying to get that more in the Southeast because we've enjoyed that piece. It's not as mobile, but in the Northeast, we're seeing more of it. So critical issues, I would say, Vermont Christian is a school that we need to pray for. They're up against it. They're facing a challenging situation where they could be banned from participating in athletics. And so we need to pray for the leadership of that school because they're in hostile territory. Right. They're hearing it, they're under attack. It's not as though the media is for them, they're against them. And so they're truly having to take a stand in the midst of something that we're not facing here, but that head of school is facing it and they're hearing it and they're having to do something hard and difficult that the world says is mean and ugly. But in reality, we know that they're doing something that is standing for the gospel and the truth of God's word. And so I think praying for those leaders in the midst of those places, like, even in California, some of the things that they're facing there is what we can do to help and support them.
I was just going to say that. I was out in California with Cecil Swetland, our Western Division Senior Director, just several weeks ago, and they're dealing with some of the very same kinds of issues. I think within their athletic system, requirements for transgender athletes to be able to participate. They're not even giving the Christian schools an option. You're either with us or you can go join some other athletic association, that kind of thing. It's just it's very, very challenging for them. And one of the things that, our vision through 2030 and beyond is to have an advocacy field director in every state. So we've kind of expanded this field. We piloted this field director model, part of our reshaping over the last several years. Started out with 2. Doc Sherrill was one, from NRCA, and he's, I guess, emeritus right now, former head of school and superintendent. But we would love, so we have 40 now, all across the United States, very strategically placed, that are an extension, for example, of Chuck's reach. As senior director, Chuck's got almost 1,000 schools up and down the East Coast. He can't possibly minister to, consult, connect, with every single one of them on a regular basis. So a field director like Doc Sherrill or someone else who, is in that is a highly credible leader, that is a leader among leaders, and can assist and kind of pay it forward, as it were. Part of our vision beyond, sort of the garden variety, field director, is to actually have state advocacy, at least one field director in every state that is going to be dialed into the issues that are happening in the legislature, hot button type stuff. So again, we want to mobilize. We need to, we talk about stronger together at ACSI, kind of, that is so much more than a slogan. Mm-hmm. It's true, right? As the body of Christ, for such a time, especially now, if there was ever a time when we were to come together to advocate and to speak up and mobilize, and it's about what we're for, right? I love what you said earlier, James, because so often, as Christians, we're known for what we oppose, right? And I love the fact that our focus is on religious freedom, on choice, on things that pretty much, whether you're a supporter of Christian schools or not, you can agree on the importance of having that kind of freedom and that kind of choice, in the United States of America. And so we're continuing to work at that. Our plan is to have as many as 100 field directors as we look out towards 2030. You were actually on that critical conversation team for North America. So appreciated your involvement there, but we just have to continue to do more so that we can be united and moving forward together, because as Chuck was saying earlier, the environment out there can be pretty hostile depending on where you are. We've been fortunate in the South, Like we're kind of, I live in Alabama, was at a couple of schools in Alabama, buckle of the Bible Belt. We're not dealing with some of the same kinds of issues as in Vermont and California, but we're in this thing together, and so we need to support each other as much as we can.
But we will be, and that's kind of like coming to a school near you is what kind of way the way you guys phrased it. I served for 12 years in New England, so I totally understand what it is to be in a place where there are very few people who are evangelical believers, and just the challenges that are inherent to that. I served for 15 years in Savannah, which is a very different place than even here in north of Atlanta. It's fascinating to see, even in my 3 years, I'm just starting my fourth year here at Hebron, and to even see how Gwinnett County has changed just in 3 years. There's been a marked shift, to the left, and so it's been so intriguing to watch that, and that's where I had the privilege of actually being in the State House a couple of years ago when they were doing debates over SB 10 and SB 43, which is providing funding for kids with any type of educational needs. And what was so intriguing is to watch the lobbyists work, and the folks who were kind of part of that discussion. We had people who were heads of Christian schools. There was a Muslim school there. There was non-sectarian, just private schools related to that. What was so interesting is that all of us were saying the same thing. This idea that we have to be able to help these families so that the parents have this choice in relation to this. Now, we take it from a faith perspective. And again, I've chatted with some folks when they're like really nervous about having other schools. But hey, listen, if truth is true, then the truth still surfaces. It just does. So I'm not worried about that. The gospel is still the gospel. The gospel is still true. And that's part of the mission field that we're working with, which is such an enormous part of what we're doing. Hey, let's dig into leadership here just for a little bit. As we're thinking about kind of what it is to orchestrate change in organizations, what it is to orchestrate, just transitions and different components, the newness of leadership, the challenges of leadership. What do you guys see as kind of the biggest challenges that we face as leaders in Christian schools, and how are you combating those pieces?
Wow, it's a great question. We talk about everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And I thought you hit the nail on the head earlier, James, when you were talking about how it just takes one person in leadership, just takes one board member, conceivably, and I think I'd be interested to hear what Chuck has to say. But one of the things that I see consistently, especially if we're talking Christian schools in particular and Christian school leadership, is the importance of governance, the governance model, the way in which the board and the head of school work together. And we see train wrecks, and every so often, because the board gets out of its lane, the board doesn't understand, or certain board members don't understand their role, their responsibilities, things like that. That's a very important leadership, function that they're performing as a board. And hopefully that's happening in lockstep with the head of school, and they're all sort of pulling from the same side of the rope, as it were. But we have done a extreme makeover on our board training modules, and are wanting to really focus as much time as we can on the board head of school relationship and the nature of biblical leadership, elder-like qualities in board members, things like that. Again, sometimes we're tempted to invite someone onto the board that might be a person of means, that's super wealthy, has donated a lot to the school, but again, testimony, sure, not really sure.
But they might not be missional aligned.
Yeah, it might not be missionally aligned. Exactly. And so this is, these are issues that we deal with on a regular basis that are not, simple. They're not simple solutions necessarily, but as we are able to get into our schools and train boards and offer them resources and that kind of thing, again, to keep them on track, because things can get off the rails in a hurry. They need to understand that the head of school is their sole employee, all the kinds of things that are best practices as far as governance. And if schools do not kind of move in that direction to kind of regularly train their board and have them understand roles and responsibilities, then, as we said before, things can change really quickly. And so that's an area of leadership that needs to be continually kind of attended to, and, an area that ACSI is willing to help in as well.
Yeah. What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, I did an informal research study on this probably 2 summers ago. So I reached out to about 15 heads across the country, and I asked them a couple questions. I asked them, what do you embrace and what do you avoid? And I was really trying to think through the issue of longevity and how do you persevere, because I think the average right now for a head of school is about 3 years, right, roughly. And I got some wonderful responses from it, and from it I kind of put it into like a couple different things that I use in a presentation. But the one that I was thinking about while David was talking was the heads that I heard from that have been in the game for a while and have endured are the ones who are able to separate out their identity from the position. And I'm talking about any position right now. We're talking about a head of school, but any position. I think what we say to the teenager who's having a fallout over a relationship, we would say to them, hey, you need to find your identity in Christ. I think we have to say that to ourselves. So whatever role you're in right now, if your identity is wrapped up in that position, it will kill you. It will drive you into the ground. But if you can separate out who you are from what you do, I think you can last. And that means I get up every morning remembering that I'm a child of the Lord. His favor is upon me. He is for me. He's doing good to me. It may be a really rough day, but if the days when I found my identity in being a head of school, like I'm a head of school, were the days where I got gut punched or where I was really down, because it's such a cyclical job. And we just plug in any position into what I'm saying right now. So for me, I think that was a big takeaway. I think what I heard from them was keep preaching to yourself. Shift back into, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm a child of the King. He is working for my good always. And what I do is I'm head of school. It's a tough job. I think it's the toughest job there is. There are so many layers, and James not asked me to say this, but there are so many layers to what you do and what you have to manage and who you have to deal with and all the plates that have to keep spinning. If I found the days when I found my social well-being, my mental health in my position were the days where I was really off. But when I could shift back to who I was as a follower of Jesus Christ, then I could find peace and knowing that the Lord's in control of this. And we've been through it. I mean, if you've led through 2020, We've led through 2008, which was another gut punch. We led through George Floyd. We led through seasons where it was somewhat catastrophic in ways, shutting down our entire schools. Those were seasons where we had to rest in the Lord and just say, He's working all things out.
You know, I've boiled so much of this down, like the epiphany that I've had over the last 10 years is really the impetus for this show, is the idea of when we view our lives, and from a vocational perspective, we all happen to be in Christian education, but frankly, most people listening aren't. When we view our lives as a calling, like when we take our eyes off of the idea that this is just our job, this is just our vocation, but instead to say there's actually a higher calling that I have. And so on the show, I've had attorneys and entrepreneurs and doctors and all of these different people in different fields, different walks of life, different career paths. But the one unifying factor with every person that I try to have on the show is to have men and women who are leaders, but men and women who understand that what they're doing is their calling. Right. And that when I see so many people in different jobs, and again, it doesn't matter whether you're a surgeon or an attorney or a head of school or a teacher, that if we take our eyes as believers, as we take our eyes off of this and just think that this is just our job, then during the hard days, during the hard times, we go, boom, I'm out. Right. Like, this stinks. There's an easier way to make money, Right. And we see that in all different fields. But when we take that and really understand, hey, this is my calling, it can transition what we do so that on the hard days that are kind of a bummer, and there, I would love to say that only happens once every few years, but nice I think try. Sometimes it happens like a few times a week. But during that, when we understand that it's a calling, that's what allows us to weather the storm. Yeah. And that also gives us such influence. Like for me, I'm dealing with a hard issue or whatnot, right? Which can be a real bummer. But then I get to be able to look into God's word with that kid or that parent who's going through the hard thing. Yeah. And now that changes everything. It changes the whole idea that I have the privilege of being able to do this. A dear friend of mine, Matt, he'd always say, we get to do this, that I now get to proclaim. And later on, we're going to be taping a show with a friend of mine who's a doctor, and he has the same mindset that he prays with all of his patients. He's been able to really be able to impact the kingdom through his role. Why? Because he isn't just a doctor. This is his calling. This isn't just his job, And I think like that to me is one of those critical issues that I think transitions people's perspective. I also think almost everybody that I've seen do a job for a long time and frankly still be killing it, right? So there are folks who retired a long time ago. They just didn't tell anyone. And so people who are killing it still, they're in the same gig for multiple decades. Almost always I track it back to the idea of calling. They've recognized that there's a higher purpose to what they're doing, and that's where I consider like what a privilege it is that we have an enormous opportunity for you. How many kids are in the Eastern Division for you? What was the number you used?
270,000, I think.
I mean, huge. Yeah. How many kids are in North America?
Oh my goodness.
Right at 600, I think. 600. North America. Well, USA is almost 600, I think.
Yeah, probably. I would think over 600,000 if you include Canada in the mix. Right. A little bit smaller.
So I mean, here, like when we think about this idea that we have this privilege. For me, I've got 1,300. So, but for us to have the opportunity to be able to give that lesson day in and day out, that if God's calling you to be a historian or a professor or a doctor or a lawyer, for you to grasp that idea that when our identity is in Christ, just like you're saying, Chuck, when our identity is Christ, then we don't serve just to get a paycheck so that we can pay our mortgage and our car payments. We serve because God's called us to that. And I think, as a kid of the 70s and 80s, a lot of times it was just the professional holy guys who ever got to be professional holy guys. But in the Bible, it says we're all ministers if we're really doing this right.
That's right.
We're meant to be ministers, but in our sphere of influence. And that's kind of at the epicenter. That's what we're trying to do on this show, is to really give pictures to people so that they can say, hey, I'm in this. I was chatting with a guy about 2 years ago, And I'm a pretty excitable fellow. Both of you guys know me pretty well. And so I stay at a fairly high pace, much to the chagrin of my bride many times. But I was chatting with a guy who was a stunt pilot. Now, can you picture there being any more exciting job than being, like, that's not a bad gig. I get to fly, every day I go to work and I fly in circles. Like, you know, like, that would be pretty fun. He's a stunt pilot. And he was so bored with his job. Like, I chatted with him on the side, like, how in the world are you making a stunt pilot be boring? And this guy's he was a believer, and so we had great conversations about faith. But I was challenging him with the idea, well, how do you use this for God's glory? Like, how are you? And so when we transition our mind into that mindset, that's what builds longevity, I think.
Yeah,
you know,
agreed.
is that challenge, you know? So what's next for everybody? We're talking about the North American initiative. We're talking about kind of changing into some global ideas. What are you guys seeing next for ACSI?
Yeah, it's these are exciting days. Our president, Dr. Larry Taylor, likes to say, "Great days ahead, great days ahead." And I'll tell you what, he's absolutely right. We see challenges, you know, ahead for our schools and for us as an organization, but these are exciting times. ACSI, as ACSI 2.0 continues to emerge, the vision that God gave us a few years ago that includes those 3 pillars that some folks listening in may or may not be familiar with: advocacy, advancing, and access. There's a lot kind of wrapped up in those, but we are continuing to build out that strategic plan, which we really believe is from the Lord. You know, through 2030 and beyond, becoming global is really at the heart of that. But digital initiatives and a whole host of other things that haven't been completely rolled out yet, folks will begin to see more and more over the next few years. But our president is just outstanding, and we have an excellent team, and so we're really getting after it. We're having a lot of fun, but we're getting after it and wanting to serve our school better than ever going forward.
What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, agreed. So and you were part of this. The 2030 plan is what we're focused on. So we had this, you know, shoot for the moon. What could we be by 2030? And then we, you know, put that into these critical conversations, which you were a part of. And right now what we're doing is they're synthesizing all of that, all those critical conversations, and what is achievable by 2030. And so now we'll roll out what that's going to look like. And David touched on a few of those things. And so I think we're in that season of how can we prayerfully support you? It's a unique ministry because while we're helping Hebron at 1,300, we're helping XYZ school at 75 students or whatever the case may be. So how are we meeting the needs of all of our schools on a national level and globally? So that's where we're at right now in that strategic planning phase and looking to roll out the next iteration of who we're going to be as an association. I'm excited about it. And in the middle of that, you know, the digital initiatives that we're putting out, we're revamping all of our professional development. We're rethinking accreditation. We just redid all of that process with the new Inspire protocols to
the certification piece you mentioned earlier.
Certification piece.
Yeah.
We're one of the things that I think is really going to be cool is we're rolling out stuff through our ministry department that's going to help with student leadership, with parent development, which we think is a big piece within our schools because, as we've already talked about, families are coming.
Right, it's the whole community.
What is Christian education? You know, you're fleeing from something, but fleers sometimes keep fleeing if we don't help them understand the mission. So that's a big part. We've just totally revamped student activities, which is no longer called student activities. We're really trying to be 21st century thinking in that so that it's not just, we'll always have a spelling bee type mentality. There's going to be that, but we need things for entrepreneurs. We need Shark Tank. We need STEM competitions, all the things that are going to be next level competitions for our students. So
and the new name, Student Leadership and Learning. And it's all about enriching experiences beyond the classroom, you know, that kind of thing. One thing I'll mention that I've been excited about, Lynn Swanner, Dr. Lynn Swanner, our Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, and I came on board in 2015. Both arrived at the same time. And you know, we, in many ways, you know, in 8 years, we've become a vastly different organization. We're much more nimble. I think we're leaner. We're much more strategic now. But I'll tell you what, the research, that's a piece that is continuing to kind of develop and evolve. from some of the things that we did with Barna early on to research around sustainability, around faith, flourishing, and our 5 domains, 35 constructs that comprise the flourishing research. I mean, this is incredible work that's being done by Dr. Swanner and her team, and that will continue on into the future as well. And again, trying to do things for many. You're in a well-resourced school, and HCA can do some things that other schools can only dream of to some degree. But we want to help all of our schools, absolutely. But in a lot of cases, especially with the research, the breadth of the research, we're able to do some things that our Christian schools couldn't possibly do. And that's part of, I think, what makes the future of ACSI and Christian education so exciting is, being able to provide resources, provide research that is only going to help our schools get better and be on that path of continuous improvement that we all believe in so much for God's glory.
It's awesome. Well, listen, I pray for you guys all the time. I pray for Larry Taylor. He's just a unique visionary leader who is fighting the good fight. So
and
guys,
a great guy,
and again, no relation of mine, but he's just a great guy. Guys, thank you so much for being on the show today. The high calling of Christian education, I believe with my whole heart, is going to be one of the greatest impetuses for the spread of the gospel in this next generation.
Yep.
And I feel like, us telling that authentic message is going to be crucial to the stability of our nation. I really believe it, that we've got to have young men and young women stepping into leadership roles in a deliberate fashion where they're bringing an authentic faith into those roles. And I think it's going to be crucial. And so I really believe you guys are on absolutely the front lines of what this looks like. And I appreciate your service, and I'm going to be continuing to pray for you guys. Thanks for jumping on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate you.
Great to be here.